Welcome to The Explainer. If you look at the massive, multi-billion-dollar business of North American professional soccer today, it's really easy to just assume it was this slow, steady climb to the top. But honestly, the truth is actually a dramatic, absolute roller coaster of a history. We're talking massive highs and devastating lows. Okay, let's dive into this and explore the fascinating business, the structural failures, and those brilliant rule changes that literally took the sport from total bankruptcy to a global powerhouse.
The whole story is really defined by a super stark contrast. Just look at these two extremes. On one hand, you've got the golden era of the original North American Soccer League, the NSL. Back in 1977, a playoff game actually drew almost 78,000 screaming fans. That rivaled the Super Bowl. But then, look at the other extreme. Just 7 years later, in 1984, total collapse. The entire league folded completely. North America was left without a premier professional outdoor soccer league at all. So how on earth does a sport lose absolutely everything? And more importantly, how did they eventually get it back?
Let's move to and see how this builds across our timeline. 5 really critical milestones completely define this evolution. We start with the huge ambition of the NSL's founding in 1968, which crashes into its demise by 1984. Then, there's this massive 10-year gap before the 1994 World Cup steps in and forces a hard reset. That leads directly to the launch of Major League Soccer in 1996. And finally, we hit the ultimate economic game changer in 2007, the designated player rule.
Section 1. The first soccer boom.
To really understand today's landscape, we absolutely have to start with the wild, high-scoring, totally celebrity-driven era of the original NASL. This was an era basically defined by a complete lack of restraint. The entire strategy was just importing massive international star power to instantly legitimize the sport in the US and Canada. And you know what? For a brief, shining moment, it absolutely worked. 77,691. That is a staggering number. That was the attendance for the New York Cosmos 1977 playoff game against the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. At the time, that figure didn't just break North American records, it rivaled the biggest European clubs and actually surpassed the attendance for that year's Super Bowl. Backed by massive corporate money, the Cosmos were literally the hottest ticket in town.
But if we take a closer look at the on-field production, a pretty glaring structural issue starts to reveal itself. Just check out the top 3 regular season goal scorers in NSL history. You've got Giorgio Chinaglia with 193 goals, Alan Willie with 129, and Karl-Heinz Granitza right behind him with 128. Notice a pattern here? What do they all have in common? They were all imported international stars. Now sure, it created this incredibly thrilling, high-scoring product on the pitch, but it was completely masking the fact that the league was basically building a house without a foundation.
And that brings us right to the inevitable collapse. The NASL's total demise in 1984 wasn't just bad luck. It was caused by a really lethal combination of factors. Basically, the league allowed rampant, completely unrestricted overspending on aging foreign stars. And because they were spending absolutely everything at the very top, they completely ignored domestic player development. So when the novelty finally wore off and the economy started to shift, the financial instability was just catastrophic. The music stopped and the league folded completely.
Section 2. Collapse and the 1994 Reset.
So after 1984, North American soccer entered what you can really only describe as the Dark Ages. But there was this huge global event on the horizon that was about to force a complete, hard reset of the sport on the continent. I'm talking about the 1994 FIFA World Cup, hosted right in the United States. And wow, the spectator turnout was just staggering. 3.6 million fans. They were literally packing into these massive stadiums that were originally built for American football. To put that into perspective, even today, decades later, it still remains the most attended FIFA World Cup in history. It completely, unequivocally proved that the American appetite for the beautiful game absolutely hadn't died with the NASL.
But the real impact wasn't just about massive ticket sales. It was deeply cultural. Take a look at this quote from Chris Wondolowski, who would go on to be a Hall of Famer. He was just 11 years old back in 1994, literally watching the Brazilian national team practice through a tiny hole in a chain-link fence. He recalled the crazy atmosphere, the goals, the raw energy, and he said, "I remember thinking, I want this." That single tournament essentially created an entire generation of future domestic stars.
Section 3. Birth of Major League Soccer.
Of course, pure inspiration doesn't actually build infrastructure, right? To make sure those fatal mistakes of the NASL were never repeated, the rebirth of the sport required a really calculated, highly structured solution.
And here is a super fascinating detail. MLS didn't just organically spring up out of nowhere just because people enjoyed watching the World Cup. It was actually a mandatory mandate. FIFA explicitly required the creation of a sustainable domestic league as a completely non-negotiable condition for even awarding the US the 1994 World Cup bid in the first place. So this intense top-down pressure ensured that when MLS finally launched in 1996, it was designed first and foremost with one goal: survival.
And to guarantee that survival, MLS implemented some extremely strict financial controls. Get this, by 2006, the estimated salary cap for an entire team was just $1.9 million. Really think about that for a second. While European clubs were out there spending tens of millions on single players, MLS clubs had to spread less than $2 million across their entire roster. Now, did it prevent bankruptcy? Absolutely. But it also meant the league was kind of lacking the flashy star power they desperately needed to really capture mainstream attention.
Section 4. The Beckham Rule.
So the league was finally stable, but it was also pretty stagnant. They really needed a way to recapture that crazy celebrity buzz of the old NASL, but obviously without falling back into that same trap of total financial ruin. Well, in 2007, they found their game-changing loophole. So the crucial point is this new mechanism, the designated player, or DP rule. This essentially allowed MLS franchises to sign up to 3 players whose massive salaries wouldn't actually count against that super strict team salary cap. Only a specific regulated fraction of their salary would hit the cap, and the team's ownership would just pay the rest straight out of pocket.
And this brilliantly illustrates the evolution of the business model here. Think about it. While the NASL's completely unrestricted spending meant that literally one bad contract could sink the entire league, the MLS DP rule acted more like a regulated luxury tax. It controlled the cap hits, which kept the competitive balance perfectly intact, while still allowing these wealthy owners to safely inject massive amounts of capital into top-tier, world-class talent. Naturally, the very first player signed under this brand new rule was none other than David Beckham. His arrival at the LA Galaxy in 2007 came with a guaranteed annual base salary of $6.5 million from the league and the club. This was huge. It officially marked the dawn of a highly lucrative new era, and it proved once and for all that MLS could actually compete again in the intense international football market.
But here's the thing. MLS really didn't just want a reputation as a retirement league for aging superstars. So by 2012, they evolved the rule again. They structured the salary cap hits to heavily incentivize signing younger players. For example, if you signed a DP over the age of 23, it hit your cap for $350,000. But if you invested in a young star aged 21 to 23, that hit dropped to $200,000. And a player 20 or younger, just a $150,000 hit. This was so smart because it strategically shifted the entire league's focus right toward developing and importing young, dynamic talent.
Section 5. A global destination.
Fast forward to the present day, and the compounding results of all these strategic structural decisions are just absolutely undeniable. North America is definitely no longer a peripheral player, it's a premier global destination. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing just how incredibly far the league's spending power has skyrocketed. We are looking at the 2026 guaranteed compensation for some of the biggest names in the world playing in MLS right now. You've got Lionel Messi at a staggering $28.3 million, Son Heung-min at $11.1 million, Rodrigo de Paul at $9.6 million. That DP rule didn't just bring back the star power, it created a massive multi-million-dollar ecosystem that the old NSL could literally only have dreamed of. Which leaves us looking toward a pretty fascinating future. We've watched North American soccer literally rise from the ashes of total bankruptcy to become a league generating billions of dollars and attracting the absolute greatest players on earth. So, the big question is, who's going to be the next global superstar to cross the Atlantic? Or, as the league's revenue and its global footprint just continue to explode, will this massive growth eventually force MLS to abandon its strict salary cap entirely? Whatever happens, it's going to be incredible to watch. Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and keep learning.